The journey from Fremantle to Melbourne was not a smooth one, but very enjoyable nevertheless. When we arrived at the Docklands in Melbourne, the city looked magnificent and inviting. It had a certain twist which was so unique to Australia. All our personal belongings were carried out to a collection area, and a group of ladies and men in official attire greeted us and the other passengers who arrived as immigrants. We were directed to an office to sign certain papers where our documents and passports have also been checked. Then yet another group of friendly people spoke to us, saying, "Welcome to Australia, and may your stay be a happy one." We were so enthusiastic, excited, and happy about having undertaken such a long journey, but also very curious about what our next steps would be like in a completely new country, populated by all kinds of people. Were they going to be happy with our presence? Were some of them to oppose us, even treat us badly? Was there going to be any discrimination against us, as I experienced in parts of Europe? Would Australians accept us with our traditional values and academic qualifications? One high-ranking officer asked us where we were going to stay, obliging me to explain that we were meant to travel to Hobart, as some friends of ours were waiting and were going to accommodate us for a short while. He looked puzzled, even surprised, and checked the availability of the next flight to Tasmania. When he came back, he said a taxi service to Essendon Airport had been organized for us to catch a plane normally used to fly dignitaries, and that there was enough room for us. With a very unhappy child, we enjoyed the flight on an Ansett Airlines aeroplane to Hobart, which took just over an hour. It was evening when we arrived in Hobart Airport, and our large belongings would be delivered when we have settled in our new home. Amongst our personal belongings we had a beautiful deck chair, which was given to us as a souvenir before disembarking the Angelino Lauro. As we walked across the runway after descending on from the plane in the waiting area, a very excited Siegfried and Ruth were swinging a large placard with our names boldly written on it. In truth, I expected them to be waiting at their home after a short bus trip, but it was nice to see them at the airport. The Strohbach's home in Lena Valley, a suburb of Hobart, close to Mount Wellington, was in a beautiful farm setting. We enjoyed some snacks and talked about the interesting journey we had undertaken. We had so much to talk about, but halfway through, Ruth suggested that since we had come a very long way, we should settle in our bedrooms and rest a while. We could talk in the morning. I was not sure whether this was due to habit or genuine care on her part. However, we had rested well before our arrival. Siegfried was keen to show us a map of the world he had recently obtained, and we spoke all about the path we followed, and the events which took place on the way to Australia, somewhat in opposition to Ruth's suggestion. I made mention of the films I had shot, and asked him if it was all right to take photos of his big map, as I desired to add them to my documentary. Soon all my films were sent to AGFA's laboratories in Germany to be processed, and later I edited, spliced, added music and commentary. In the meantime, we took a little trip visiting their friends, who were either Jehovah's Witnesses or interested in their movement in various suburbs of Hobart. The city was not as sophisticated as the ones in Europe, but it had a beautiful and healthy atmosphere with extremely friendly people, reminding one of a sleepy English town somewhere in the country. On one side, Mount Wellington towered over the city, and on the other the sea stretched endlessly into distances far. The city of Hobart was truly inviting. We visited Glenorchy, a suburb of the city, and visited a Sister Kurdovic of former Yugoslavian origin. The Kurdovics had a separate dwelling in their backyard, and would love to have us as tenants. They wanted us to look after the place and pay a minimal rent. This sister was closely befriended with the Strohbachs from their local congregation, and had a family which remained friendly with the witnesses. They also had a large black and white television set in their lounge room. After we had settled in the small dwelling, which was just large enough for our needs, the Americans landed the first man on the moon. Radio and television programs were replete with the important news of this most exciting event. Despite opposition expressed by Magda about watching the first moon landing on July the 16th, 1969, with the devil's tool, the television, I asked the Kurdovics if we could share this once-in-a-lifetime experience. We watched it in extreme awe. However, Magda kept interrupting and talking over the commentaries, exclaiming that this could only be lies, as Satan the devil was putting those images in front of our eyes, trying to make us believe in empty lies, so that we may think very little of God's kingdom. Obviously she knew the entire truth in her supreme wisdom. At the time, Sister Kurdovic was busy in the kitchen preparing snacks and coffee. Soon Magda joined her, saying she could not stand such rubbish. I was thoroughly enjoying the program together with the children, who were very excited about this unique event. I was happy to experience what the rest of the world was watching. It was something I could never forget, but I believe Magda preferred it not to have happened. Probably other witnesses felt just the same. Living with extremely superstitious and cultist people who believed that their way was the only righteous one was the hardest thing to experience, let alone accept it as the reality. We were like chalk and cheese with our interests. I wished there had never been any involvement with Jehovah's Witnesses, who preached about supposed love everywhere, but never applied it, instead living with a very strict and backward dogma as their adopted belief system. When I met them in the early days, I thought there was hope after all, wondering if I could be helped only to take me out of that country where I was considered as the lowest kind of creature. In truth, my only involvement with them was simply just a desire to make new friends. Ideally, we need to accept everyone, whether they are black or white, tall or short, ugly or beautiful, with all their interests and even their beliefs. We can all learn things from each other and create an ideal society living in peace. I have been brought up accepting others as they were, living in harmony, without judging them. blending in with their system, while not necessarily becoming exactly like them. My involvement with the witnesses was just for the friendship, discovery, and accepting their help to escape possible innuendos interrupting my personal involvement as a human being. It was equally a beautiful thing to associate with interesting people. If they had been able to convince me about the absolute truth behind their wisdom, proving themselves to be completely true to their resolve, who knows, I might have been following a different pathway today. I have met many wonderful people, but at the same time I had to rescue myself from being belittled, undermined, and even forced to fail in all my endeavors. However, what I have discovered with the witnesses, after my long association with those so-called friends adhering to that belief system, my opinions about them was drastically changed. I never thought that people could be as extremely fanatical with their belief as even to destroy their own families in the name of self-made truths and supposed love. It has been very educational. Alas, the more extreme fanaticism and criticisms I experienced from Magda and her fellow believers, the more distant I became. It was indeed like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Lydia H. Zigoni writes, "Life has indeed ills, but the mind that views every object in its most cheering aspect, and every delightful dispensation as replete with latent good, bears within itself a powerful and perpetual antidote." The Strohbachs were very content with their acre of land, goats, chickens, and lots of herbs. Their neighbor, an elderly bachelor, was intending to sell his piece of land and little shed to someone who could look after them, as he explained that he had nobody to pass them on to, and was willing to part from everything he owned for the very small sum. After speaking with this gentleman, he agreed that I could see him in the morning and pay him the money in cash. I was going to suggest that he could stay there as long as he desired, without needing to pay anything, but in the morning he was no longer there, and the developer had already snatched it up. He had been quickly moved from there, and was now housed in an old people's home. Upon this, Magda, supposedly consoling me, said that she was praying for this deal not to go ahead for us, as she did not want to be too materialistic. But I was saddened about the poor old gentleman. Sister Kurdevik, on the other hand, was very happy to accommodate us. Magda was content with the idea, and in reality she was over the moon. However, it was going to be very hard for us until our household goods from Germany were delivered, although she was not bothered. As long as we had a bed and some food on the table, she would not worry about anything. The most important task ahead for her was to preach the word of God to as many people as she could. I suppose her strict adherence to the commands she was issued with, in this instance, might have been good for her, as it gave her a sense of belonging. For me it was endurable for a short time. That is, at least, until our belongings arrived. In just under a week they were delivered, and I was pleased to discover that nothing was broken. Magda was also very happy to discover that her collection of Watchtower magazines and yearbooks were in perfect order. However, our white goods, which we had been advised to leave behind, because here in Australia every latest gadget was available, proved to be a traumatic experience. For example, our front-loader washing machine was completely unknown in Hobart, and we were even told by the salesperson that such could not have been invented yet, and that the only modern equipment they could supply us with was the twin tub with rollers on the top. They probably thought we were from planet Mars. No matter where we went and searched for what we were accustomed to having, we could not find it anywhere. It was as if we had traveled back in time by at least 20 years. As we unpacked our goods, we realized that we should have taken everything with us despite all the advice, but in good faith we left them all behind. About a week later, I was testing my small personal television set and discovered Channel 7 network broadcasting test color images and camera footage. Soon after, they began broadcasting some of their programs, particularly sporting events, in color. Some of our neighbors, having noticed the color screen, obviously spying through the windows, were curiously asking about what they were seeing. When it was explained, they could not believe that television could be in color. I wanted to replace my television with a large screen one, despite opposition from Magda, but they were either not yet available in Australia, or else were very expensive. For a long while we did not even have a black and white set in our lounge, for Magda considered it to be the devil's tool. Very rarely look at my small television set, and then only in private, but when Magda went visiting her dear brothers to preach with them door to door, I took it out with trepidation in case she decided to come home a little early, discovering me being engaged with an evil gadget, which took my mind off thinking about God's kingdom. This attitude on her part made me feel like a guilty little boy, and I was only living in fear with her. What I am freely expressing now, I dared not speak then, for fear of constant criticism about my being unfaithful to the great Creator and His divine commands. What I am saying now is not exaggerated. I prefer to remain as truthful as one can be. Even with my dreams, imaginings, and those unusual experiences I had, I prefer always to remain true. Since I do not seek any recognition from anybody, I do not seek approval for things I know and have experienced since my childhood. I was under constant pressure from some Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly Magda, and was unsure how to please my wife to keep the family going. On the other hand, although I had applied for positions through the higher education system in Hobart, my qualifications were considered to be either too high or they did not have an opening. I had no idea about the Australian social welfare schemes, where one could obtain minor assistance to help me find suitable employment. I was conducting a full research to discover whatever jobs were available, no matter how mediocre or unsatisfying. At one of the universities I was told that if they could obtain appropriate funding to start a branch of study with my input, they would happily employ me